Great, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is David Walsh from Zoo Advisors. We'll just give 1 or 2 more minutes here for everybody to get started. If we could ask those that aren't speaking, if you can make sure your speaker is muted for the call, we would appreciate it. And I'll get started in a minute and kick things off. As more people, Okay, I'm going to get started here. Again, welcome. My name is David Walsh, the principal of Zoo Advisors. Many of you already have seen me. This is our continuing series of community conversations that we started.
I just said that we could just take more stringent actions, but we're just being consistent in what we've been doing.
Sorry,
You're
could everybody
consistently
make
asking
sure they
people to
mute
provide it.
their, I'm going to mute everyone.
Test results to show they were negative. And
There we go. Sorry about that. Again, welcome. So I'm joined today by 2 of my colleagues. Really excited to make an announcement today. First of all, to welcome Katelyn from to our team as our new Director of Engagement. We're really excited to have Katelyn on board to help us. And also Lori Perkins. Lori is still Deputy Director at Birmingham Zoo, but she has also agreed to be of counsel to Zoo Advisors and really help us through these conversations on social justice and social equity. So we're really proud and pleased to have those 2 join us in addition to the rest of our team. And Lori and Katelyn will be taking the lead in facilitating, but I first wanted to say a couple of words of welcome. In this, our first series of 4 sessions in February to talk about social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. But one of the questions I always get as we've put these sessions on, particularly around this topic, is why? Why is the Zoo Advisors and why is David Walsh, this white middle-aged guy who grew up with a ton of privilege, doing these sessions? Well, as a friend and colleague, Cassandra Ray said to me, you have the responsibility to use your privilege for good, and that's what we're trying to do. And so we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. We've seen the inequities and the lack of inclusion of diverse voices in the leadership and around the planning tables and in the audience of zoos and aquariums, and that really must change. And we're doing it because we know if things don't change, our clients aren't going to be relevant and aren't going to be sustainable to the communities we serve. And we're doing it because we really have the platform and space to be able to reach across this community and affect change at all different levels, from boards to CEOs and directors to staff. And I know we don't have all the answers, that's clear, but we're inviting you along this journey with us. And we promise together, we're going to use our space and our platform to really make change for good. So today we start that, and we start it with the why. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lori to get things started.
Thank you, David. Let me ask a quick question to Katelyn. Are we going to do a poll or are we not?
Oh my goodness.
No.
Yes. And I totally forgot to send that question to David. That is 100% my bad.
No, that's okay. I will do my shtick and we can do the poll.
I'll send the question right now, David, while you're talking, and then we can send it out to people.
Awesome.
Great, thank you.
So obviously, we have a poll, just one poll question that we wanted to ask to sort of get an idea of who's in our audience. We've got 157 people on the call, which I think is pretty awesome. So anyway, stay tuned for that. But yeah, so on this topic of DEAI, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, it feels to me as if the time is really right for us to be exploring these topics and looking at them at a deeper level. I feel like there's this opportunity, something has happened in the world that has brought us to a point where I think that we are ready to have some more meaningful conversations about social justice and DEAI. And again, judging by that 158 now people on the webinar, I'd say that there's pretty tremendous interest. I hope we're going to be able to hear about some of what's motivated that interest. The poll might start to get to that, because I think we really need to understand the point we're starting at if we're going to be able to go forward productively and together in having this conversation. My guess is that there are questions out there about why this topic is relevant to zoos and aquariums. And maybe more to the point, why it's a topic for accreditation scrutiny. We all know that there's this new standard, 7.9, and that requires a written diversity, equity, access, and inclusion program that is supposed to be proactive and transparent, have measurable goals and clear oversight. It is supposed to include a recognition of the important connection between mission and diversity, and have an ongoing effort to enhance DEAI in staff, volunteers, guests, and suppliers. So that's kind of a lot, right? There is an AZA session on DEAI program tomorrow that I imagine I will be on, and I imagine I'll see a lot of you on that as well. But I think that's a lot, and I think it can be kind of scary and overwhelming for folks. I think that most AZA members are sold on the business case. I think that's a more straightforward case to be made, but I sometimes wonder if the buy-in is really as deep on that relevance to mission, on the connection to mission. And I wonder if we can find a way to encourage our leadership, ourselves and our leadership, to genuinely embrace the promotion of DEAI in all those aspects. And if those kind of loftier goals beyond just economics can bring more sincerity in that. So that's, as David said, we want to start with why. That's why we want to start with why. I think it is completely legit to have questions saying, well, why are these social issues? Why do these social issues have anything to do with how we operate our zoos? And why is it any of accreditation's business? And why is it relevant to our core missions? So we're going to spend this month, as David said, we're going to have 4 of these sessions every Thursday. I hope you will all come along with us. We're going to try to dive a little deeper into it. It happens to be Black History Month. That is a circumstantial synergy that I'm happy worked out that way. We're going to try to explore those questions, and we hope we can do it with you. We want to have open and safe forums where people can feel comfortable sharing where they are on this, and try to start to get to the truth of where we are starting from as a community, and then see where we can travel together. So we'll be having these weekly webinars, which will include the opportunity for you to hear the personal stories and the lived experiences of a variety of our colleagues from both minority and majority cultures and races and ethnicities. I think it is important to, the white males like David have an important voice here in an ally sense, and we don't want to, it can't be exclusive. And our hope is that we can, through all of those voices, you can find something that resonates with you and makes sense with you. And we also want to hear yours. We're going to encourage you to share your stories as well in some of the upcoming webinars. So we've got some wonderful leaders with us today that I'm going to ask some questions of, that they don't know what the questions are that I'm going to ask them. So we'll see how they do. But before I kick it to Jo-Elle, do we want to do the poll, or do we want to do it later on?
Nope, I have the poll.
Awesome.
Here
we go. Yeah,
we go.
it's as simple as that. So that's the easy question we would like you to answer. like I said, part of our goal is to sort of just see, I don't think we can productively move forward if we don't know where we start from. And so that's our goal, is to try to figure out where people are starting from, and then be able to go along the journey together.
Okay, I think we have almost everybody. So has everybody seen the results there?
Okay, look at that. So a pretty evenly split between those first two, which is good, right? I'm glad that people are at least beginning to have those, to be thinking about it and to be giving it some thought. So that's great. And I'm also pleased to see how many are giving it a lot of thought. That's pretty encouraging as well. That's good stuff. So thank you for that. So with that information, one of the things that we wanted to sort of kick off with was talking about the history. And I'm going to ask Jo-Elle to talk about this from a couple of different perspectives, because she shared with me some information just a few minutes ago about the history of the diversity committee in our community. But I also think the more recent history has something important to look at, right? I think that something about what happened on May 25th, 2020, which was the day that both George Floyd was killed, and the day that Christian Cooper, the bird watcher, was, that incident happened in Central Park. And both of those, which had very different outcomes, sort of really made us all sit up and pay attention. It certainly did for me. In some ways, the Christian Cooper thing was even more frightening to me. But something feels like it was different in this more recent history. And I wonder if you would, if you could speak to your thoughts on that, Jo-Elle.
Sure. So first of all, I will answer your question, Lori, but first of all, I want to point out David as an example of allyship in this. As I look at the screen and see a diverse group of participants, we talk about allies to different causes and how, if you're not a part of the group, how can you support the group? I think David and what he's done with Zoo Advisors and welcoming Lori and Katelyn into the Zoo Advisors fold exemplifies allyship, and how you can take your strengths and skills and build on that to support folks who are a little bit different than you. So David, I just want to give you kudos for that. You've been having these conversations and asking questions for a while. And so to answer your question, Lori, I became involved heavily in the diversity committee probably around 2003. And what I went back in preparation for this talk was going back through some old documents. The first business case for diversity for AZA was finalized in 2003. There have been, I believe, 2 updates since then. And the business case was always the same. It was always saying that, and the work of the committee at that time focused on awareness and empathy building. And so the committee at that time, and even before I joined, was talking about demographic trends that were coming. And so that even if your organization, the folks you serve, the communities that you sit in are one way now, the trends are coming and we should be proactive and prepared. And that was some of the awareness piece. And then there was some empathy building pieces with some workshops at AZA that were sort of trying to get people to empathize to the world that other people lived in. My understanding is that those didn't go so well. People were left hanging, they were left hurt, they were left confused. And I think I use that to bridge to today, because I think what has happened is that the empathy piece has increased because we are very visual society and visual in the moment. So I'm not recounting a story that happened in the past. I'm seeing it because it was recorded in the moment. And so when I think back to the work that the diversity committee was doing then, the chickens had basically come to roost. The demographic trends have happened just like they were projected to happen. The issues around people being treated differently for things that they cannot control. Now the world is seeing that that is essentially the case. And it's almost as if, you know, you buy a new car and you think, oh, I'm the only one with this car. And then all of a sudden you realize everybody has this car. And so I think that's the interesting moment in time that we're in. The things that BIPOC communities have been talking about, the things that the LGBTQ community have been talking about, and saying have been happening to them, and how things have been unfair, are now video with no other interpretation possible, no ability to make an excuse for the behavior that they're seeing. And I think the most recent example I can think of is the 9-year-old girl who was pepper sprayed in the back of a police car, where you're seeing it and you can't possibly come up with an explanation to pepper spray a 9-year-old child. So that I think is really what's different. We're seeing things happen in real time to people, and we're seeing it not only from the perspective of the person, but also from the perspective of what's happening to them and whoever is doing it. And I think that is creating empathy in a way we have never, ever been able to create empathy before, which is creating, I think, more allies.
I like that, Jo-Elle. I think that's a really important way to look at it. I think you're right. And what really resonates for me from what you said is that empathy piece. Someone mentioned to me this morning, actually, I was talking about this with my CFO, who comes from a completely business background, not part of the zoo world, completely sold on the mission and all that sort of thing. But I asked her, what do you think about these things coming from your background? Do you feel like this is relevant? And what she said is that her focus is on, she wants to keep the Birmingham Zoo in its lane, but she feels like this is part of the lane from the people piece. She doesn't feel like this is outside of our lane from that point of view. And she said that the word she used was dignity. That she feels like this is an issue of dignity. And I think that goes along sort of with empathy and with all of these other pieces that we talk about when we have these conversations. So yeah, I love the empathy piece. And I think you're right, having that visibility is part of the avenue into what builds empathy, for sure. So I wanted to, you know, we've talked a lot about the business case, and Jo-Elle is talking about how long we've been talking about the business case, since 2003. I do think that is one of the more direct pathways that can help people have their entree into this world. I think there's even some nuances there, right? I think it's not simply just about what's the bottom line and how much money did I make. Because there are pieces about community support, there are pieces about employee engagement. And I'm gonna turn to Nick Dehejia at Oakland Zoo, the next CEO. Congratulations, Nick. And just ask if you have any perspective or what your thoughts are on sort of that business case evolving into more of a mission case, a connection case.
Yeah, and thank you, Lori, for that call out, and thanks, David, as well, obviously, for hosting these. You know, I'm obviously glad to join, and I personally feel a sense of urgency, obviously, on these issues, both as a person of color, you know, born in India and moved to the U.S. when I was young, but just this conscience, certainly, of doing the right thing, and I think Lori, you know, hit that in the blog post as well. This idea of the lane, Lori, is interesting that you mentioned, because on another topic with the inauguration of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, I wrote an email to all staff about the momentous occasion of this new administration. I tried to not be political, and the comment was really about how we can now fight even greater for animals and the environment. And we posted that on our social media. And, okay, I'm from California, so you would think everybody would be supportive. And we did get some negative blowback on that. People thinking it was too political and saying, you're a zoo, you should stay in your lane. And so, that's on some of our core work of conservation, and people in this time and period feeling that we should stay in our lane. And obviously we can't stay in our lane. We need to be able to step out. And obviously this topic as well is something that we need to do. Obviously we need to do it respectfully, respectful of who our visitors are, their differences, their opinions, what they value. On the business case, and I appreciate Jo-Elle, that obviously the demographic trends are happening. And I also did a little bit of quick research with the new census that came out. They're not only happening, they are accelerating. So when we talk about relevancy, I am seeing our customer base shrinking if we don't do it right. And there's a lot of data that's showing, what's happening. And you can research this. And I did a Google research here. And even Zoo Advisors held a session with a Wharton professor who wrote a book on 2030 that talked about some of these demographic trends. So the population data is clear. The white majority is going to disappear. That was a headline in an article that I read. And it's happening not just in certain pockets, it's happening across the country. So yes, if you live in, Tennessee, Indiana, Idaho, Utah, Wisconsin, the white population is still 70% or higher, but certainly in California, parts of Texas, Georgia, Nevada, that white population is under 50%. And it's happening. What was even more interesting is that it is the white population share is declining across the entire United States. So it doesn't actually matter what state you're in, it's happening. So, and the other piece of that was for those under 16. A note that in 2019, I found a data point, more than half of the nation's population under 16 identifies as a racial or ethnic minority. So, the data trends are there and they're accelerating tremendously. The second piece that I'm thinking about is the funding community, especially because of the pandemic. Our funders now have way more responsibility, way more issues to deal with. And they're looking at how do they support homelessness? How do they support communities of color? And so the question is, if we're not looking at it, it's no longer certainly how many kids do we reach and what the numbers are, but who are we reaching and what those outcomes are going to be increasingly important. We've had some conversations just here in Oakland, where there were tougher conversations about who we're going to reach and what those outcomes are in those communities. So there is a potential chance that we're going to lose some of our funding community as well. And then I don't know what's happening across the country, but a third one that I'm seeing is just the laws that are happening that are seeking changes in governance at this point on corporate boards. And so in California, they passed SB 979 that went into effect. And the goal there is that all public companies in California have to have representation, based on their size of people of color. They've always now had to have representation of women. And so now this is a law that has been enacted. So, we need to look obviously at our boards to understand where we are. And with this law in California, that if you do not meet these requirements, you're subject to penalties of $100,000 to $300,000. So we need to stay ahead, obviously, of the legal issues. And you may have these in other parts of the country, but I found that to be a particularly interesting one. And so, we all have accessibility. Being accessible to all. I think we all talk about that. What I've found is that there's this inertia that slows us down. Well, but we've always done it like this. And so we know we need to do it, but there's so many other things on our plate that we sort of fall back into that. Well, we've always done it like this. I've heard somebody say to me, well, but they all speak English. So it's okay. You don't need to have it in a different language. And so there is still that mentality that we need to change as leaders so that, we keep pushing and probing as to what is holding us back. And I think if we are going to be, and I say that the real downside of this is we could become targets, and not just targets that some of us are used to around animal welfare issues. We're going to be targets around not addressing DEAI. Some of you may have seen there is a Instagram account called Change the Museum, and it took off like wildfire. And this Instagram account has something about 40,000 followers, more than 600 posts of employees posting about in the museum world, what racism exists and how they're being treated. And I quickly searched when I found out, is there a Change the Zoo? Because I was worried about that. And luckily there isn't yet, but we have to be mindful that if we don't address it, we're going to get called out more and more. And we're going to get called out from our own employee population, let alone the governing laws around us. So there's just a few thoughts to kick that off.
Yeah, I think that's super important, Nick. Thank you so much for hitting on all of those points, because, and Jo-Elle was correcting me appropriately that I keep forgetting when I say the business case for diversity, I always sort of just think of it as the money case, right? And that's not what the business case is about. The business case does talk about sort of these more social issues and relevance and that sort of thing. But I think your point about the accelerating rate of change in our country is really critical. It's, I think that the people of color of my generation certainly had, as many of you have heard me say before, I have always been the only Black person in the room. And it is really thrilling to me to see, even just on, there's how many screens, 8 screens of people, but on my one screen, there's so many people representing other racial minorities. And I know that's just one little piece of it, but that is a super encouraging thing to see. I really do think that our communities are looking to us. They want to see better representation within our community, within our organizations. It is fascinating to me that there's a law, and as we often see, as goes California, so goes the rest of the world. So that's actually pretty, or the rest of the country, that's pretty interesting, and probably a really important thing for all of us to be mindful of, that there could be legal requirements for these things. Obviously, that's not the motivation I want somebody to be coming at from this, but it certainly is going to raise the profile of these questions. And so that's good. That's happening on that side, people worrying about sort of the economics and the legal implications. But if we can be bringing along the more sincerity, the mission connection from the other side, I think that gives us a much stronger place to be coming from, and certainly more buy-in. But yeah, that's fascinating. I'll have to actually join Instagram now. Thank you, Nick. I didn't want to do that. I guess one of the, I don't want to use up all the time, but I do want to ask Charles Hopper for his thoughts on sort of where do we go from here? What does the future look like? Like, how do we get to a place where we can have the connection, sort of what I would call converting the non-believers? And I don't mean that in a terrible way, just the folks that aren't yet on board with the idea that this is an important thing for zoos to be dedicating their time to, that it doesn't matter that we have so many things on our plate. This is something that has as much weight on those plates as any of the other actions we're taking. And I know, Charles, I know you've given a lot of thought to these concerns. What do you think is the sort of the avenue to get there? How do we bring those folks along?
Thank you, Lori. And thank you, Zoo Advisors, for hosting this as well. I think Jo-Elle and Nick did a great job of setting it up, understanding where we are as AZA Collective, where this journey started, how much progress we've had. And then, this business case conversation, as well as what seems to be what everyone latches onto very easily. But I was in a conversation not too long ago with another individual who I won't name because I don't know if they want me to. But the topic was right around the question you just asked. And my answer was rooted in the idea of our mission. We have to go back to what we're trying to do from a mission standpoint. And our missions are a global narrative. So if we're looking at protecting our animals on our planet, we're looking at protecting our planet, looking at protecting our oceans, then we have to understand what that is actually going to take. And that's going to take a global majority. And that majority isn't necessarily represented in the work that we're doing. It's not represented in the individuals that make up the fabric of our institutions necessarily. It's not represented in the community members that we engage. So I think you have to start there. You have to look at your mission as your North Star. And I think we all do that. I remember just a couple of years ago, Jackie Ogden led a conversation around conservation culture. And, looking at the fact that maybe we're doing these things because they're accreditation standards, and we're not bought in from a sole perspective of conservation being central to our mission. And I think this conversation is the same here. So I would say that the future of getting grounded in this work, this DEAI, Jay, when we're talking about justice as a conversation piece, I think getting grounded is going to take the buy-in of leadership, and it has to start there. But that buy-in has to be from a soul perspective. You have to really be committed, not just because it's an accreditation standard, but because it's the right thing to do, and you also understand the connection and importance to the mission. So the future, I think we have to open up path pipeline for individuals who are committed to this work to have opportunity for their voices to be elevated, to have leadership, access into their institutions, to be promoted from within because they're contributing at a high level, but also that representation needs to be holistic. It has to be across the diversity spectrum in order to get individuals to connect from the community and from inside of our institutions in a way that they can see themselves represented. And this is the LGBTQ plus community, our differently abled community, our BIPOC community, our women in leadership. We look at this spectrum, and there's a larger spectrum that I didn't name there, and these are just the highlights, right? The ones that get called out the most. But if we can put people in positions to where they have a voice at the table and are able to speak on behalf of their communities, not as a monolith, but at least representing some of the narratives that they're hearing from their communities, I think we can start to ingrain into a soul perspective, right? And really buy into this and see how it affects our mission. I was just thinking about this the other day. Why do we need a 19th Amendment? These questions of why. The 15th should have taken care of that for everyone, but we still see voter suppression. We still see the fact that we needed to go back and to the drawing board and say, oh, this doesn't include women. This is something that needs to be thought about again. We have to look at systems that are in place and really question them. We have to really look at why, what was it? I took notes down, SB 979. Why do we need that? Why does an institution need to be punished because they don't have correct representation? There's something more to the root of that law that's not necessarily being spoken on the surface. And so I would say the future and where we need to go is really making a commitment, a soul commitment, and questioning why we're not there yet.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. I love that. What you're saying is so much more eloquent, an eloquent way of putting what I am seeking is how do we get to that soul perspective? How do I get the board of directors, a group of wonderful people, but the board of directors of the Birmingham Zoo who are focused on how is the Birmingham Zoo doing as a bottom line? This is true for most of your institutions, I'm sure. how do I make that case to them? I see, I'm trying to watch the chat too. It's really, I'm not good at splitting my attentions, but I think Jo-Elle has had a couple of really good points. And the ones that she just made is that the reality is that the standards are a way to force change. And what I wonder about is it effective I'm going to force you to change because I've got this law in California and I've got this accreditation standard. So you have to go along with this. But maybe when you get there, you can sort of join the congregation. I don't know. It's an honest question that I don't know the answer to. If that's a good way to pull people along. I always feel like it's better to pull people than to push them. But I don't know, because the question remains, why are we still here? Why do we need these laws? So maybe we do need to push them. I don't know. I'll ask, again, I don't want to use up all of Kathy Yoon's time, but I'll ask you, Dean, if you have any thoughts on that, and then I will toss it over to Kathy Yoon.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I really want to echo what Charles said to start, is that, I think the focus is on this mission case. If you think about our mission, fundamentally is about people changing things, right? And people changing things. And if we're not focusing on the largest group of people, then our mission is less effective. And I think that's a really simple way that we've been able to have internal conversations. Like, if we really believe that our mission is about people changing, it's got to be everybody, or we're set up to fail. We're not using all the resources in our community. I also just wanted to mention, we are doing a webinar tomorrow. The AZA Diversity Committee are doing a webinar to really talk about diversity programs. And it'll be more of a nuts and bolts conversation, talking about, how to build your diversity program, how to continue to develop your diversity program. And, it's recognizing where we are. There are some folks that are much farther along on this journey right now, and folks that have developed their plans and are moving along. But I do think that there is a piece to what Jo-Elle said, is that now that it's a standard, all of a sudden people are scrambling a little bit to try to be able to meet that standard. And part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow is, what is the intent behind the standard? The intent behind the standard is that you're doing work in this, that you are anxiously engaged in this work, and that there are some evidence of that. And I think that that's the core, so before people start worrying about what their output looks like and what does their program or their plan look like, really that's what it's about, is about this idea of showing that you're doing this work and that you are going about it in a strategic way. And I think that, to answer the question of how to engage folks that are not quite there yet, or are trying to figure out how to wrap their minds around it, I think there's a few different routes that you can take. One of them is this idea of, strategic planning. I feel like zoos and aquariums are all about strategic planning, right? And I think that it has to be done strategically. It's not something that can be done once and then never referred to again. And I think this is a little bit of a tipping point with that. I know David and I have talked about that before, that I think that we're reaching a point where your strategic plan and your diversity program are going to be the same thing, or should be the same thing, and incorporate many of those things. So I think that there's a huge opportunity, but again, what is the intent? The intent is that we are engaged in work that activates our communities and that leverages our voice within that community. And we are gonna, again, in the webinar tomorrow, we'll go over some things. There are also some resources that we've created as well, and we'll be able to share those out too. They're all available right now in the Accreditation Resource Center.
Lori, if I can just jump in with one quick comment, just responding to what you asked. One of the things that we did here in Oakland several months ago in terms of influencing the discussion is we brought in, by Zoom, but brought in a diversity consultant to work with our board of trustees. And we had a 2-part session with our board. The first part was just to develop an understanding, a baseline of DEAI or DEI or the J, and sort of develop, just getting some common ground around that. And that was eye-opening from a board perspective, because it allowed some of the board members, first of all, to not feel defensive, to feel able to talk about these issues. We even had a board member, one board member said, well, I don't have a lot of friends who are people of color, and I think just breaking that conversation down at the board level was really important. We then did a board assessment, and then we followed that up with a leadership team assessment. So to understand where is the board, where is the leadership, and then through that process, the board developed a resolution such that they would look at their own representation. And so we now have a process going forward. So from just a selfish standpoint of what are we going to invest in the future? Where is our revenue going to come from? What are some priorities? Now that the board has some grounding on the language, it will be easier when we want to talk about certain investments. They're going to promote these topics that Dean is going to be leading tomorrow. So I think the board conversation was critical for us, and it's just the beginning. But hopefully that's another way to engage all of your institutions, if you haven't yet, is through the board process in a formal way.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I really think that it's going to have to start sort of on that parochial level at the individual zoos, and with the boards are where that has to come from. We've talked about that in terms of conservation commitment. We've talked about that sort of on all the mission sides of the profession, that without that local board buy-in and leadership and connection, it's really hard to get traction on these things. So yeah, I think that's great. That's a wonderful model. So thank you for sharing that. And to what Dean said, I think that I'm glad you said that tomorrow's thing is about the nuts and bolts, because I think that's what people need to build the program. I've got to have the nuts and bolts. I got to have the bricks to put in place. The buy-in, the soul commitment is the thing that makes me want to do that. But what I have to have is those nuts and bolts and pieces. So I think that's fantastic. I look forward to having that tomorrow. And Charles, go ahead with your comment, and then Kathy, and just go ahead and jump in, okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because as I listen to Dean follow up, and then also Nick, if I'm looking all the way into the future, I wanted to set up this, what the fabric has to be and the baseline has to be for somebody to really commit to this. And I do think the soul commitment is a big deal. But if I'm looking, 20, 30 years, a chief diversity officer with the, inside of every organization, with a direct report to the CEO or reporting to a director of HR with a dotted line to the CEO, I think is important. I'm looking 50, 60 years from now, I hope that position doesn't need to exist. I hope that it's just a normalcy in the makeup of what we do, that we are inclusive, diverse, and equitable in our practices. So I just wanted to throw that out there as the future. The potential is bright, but I think we just need to really recognize where we are right now.
Thank you so much for all of those insights. This was incredible and so rich. I'm going to help facilitate now the conversation part of this, and it's going to be a little challenging because we have 180 people here. But so I encourage you, I've got just a couple questions, and if you don't feel comfortable unmuting, then go ahead and throw your comments in the chat. We would love to see them. But if you do feel comfortable, we'd love to have you unmute. Just throw yourself in there and share your thoughts. So the first question I have is pretty simple. We've heard a lot today, a lot of really deep insights. What resonates with you? What have you heard that made you go, yes, or aha? Empathy Creating Allies from Kelly. Awesome. I have an audience plant, so I'm going to go ahead and call on her. Jasmine Williams, Jasmine Davis, can you share with us what some of your resonant thoughts might be?
Yeah, there was so many great comments from everyone. So just thank you to all of you for your participation, and to Zoo Advisors for putting this together. I think one of the things that is really like standing out to me is just the opportunity right now we're in, and I love the way that this has been presented from George Floyd up until now. I feel like there is so much more awareness. And I really appreciated Nick's comment about like we can't stay in our lane. And I think that's like a big thing, that's a shift, like a culture shift that we need to have. You know, I think a lot of zoos and aquariums have also been connected to cities, right? And as a part of cities, maybe you cannot, you know, make political statements, or and we tend to, I think, stay very cautious about not wanting to step out of that lane. And so I just really appreciated that comment of we can't stay in our lane. Like when it comes to this topic, it shouldn't be an option, right? We need to speak up and we need to say something. And so by seeing the events of the summer and Christian Cooper, which I think really resonates with this community in particular, and you can't ignore it. I think that's just a charge to us to take advantage of this opportunity. And that's kind of what I've been hearing everyone say, that we need to take advantage of this opportunity. Yeah, and so those are a couple of things that really stood out, but a lot of really great, rich content.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Jess, I see your hand raised. Love to hear from you.
So I think that some of the stuff that stands out to me really is that there are so many of us doing this work, and that we are all at different points in this journey, and our organizations exist within these various communities, and we have to do this work within those spaces. And I think that, you know, it's just recognizing that, like, I loved the soul commitment that Charles talked about, because I think that's such a great way to put it. Like this, we do this because it is the right thing to do. Like that, I mean, that is the foundation of it. That doesn't obviously work for everyone, because there are so many different viewpoints and experiences, but it is the importance of really stepping into it. And, you know, as everyone is saying, there are all these different reasons that go into this heightened awareness and this heightened push for action. But we have these communities here, all of us here in this space are saying, this is our lane. This is the lane for our field. And I think that's just, you know, that's really inspiring, and it means we can really get stuff done, but we have to lean into it.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, the soul commitment phrase getting a lot of shout outs in the chat. So nice job, Charles. That is obviously touches a lot of people in all the right places. So I want to pivot to another question. So there can be a little voice in our head that says, yes, but, and I want to hear about that voice. What are your hesitations? What are the things that are stopping you from getting off this call and running full force in the direction of this work? What is giving you pause?
This is Kim Fox. I'm just going to jump in.
Please, I love that about you.
So Kim Fox Middleton from the Oregon Zoo. I would say when you feel like you are the only voice doing the work. So, what I have been finding very, I'm being fed by this conversation, because in a sense, we are not the only voice. And so we may go back to our organizations, but we can go back out to our community and work with them, or we can go back out to other AZA organizations. But there are times where you're very much in it and you feel like you're the squeaky wheel, as people often say. And it's just nice to know that there are others doing the work, ideally at your organization, and you have to build that capacity. So that's something that stops me. And then also just being identified as just doing that work, that there is an expertise and this, it's not one or the other, because then you become the go-to of this. And it's like, no, I have other things to offer as well that are integrated into management of a volunteer program or education program. So the idea is that it's integrated and it's not separated. And that's what Charles was saying, basically, that right now we almost have to separate it to elevate it. But the goal is to actually have it integrated.
Great. I love that. Seeing some comments in the chat about the very vocal group of people who are unwilling to buy in. just a lack of buy-in and resistance. I think that echoes what you're saying, Kim, that even if it's not active resistance, just that idea that you're the one saying it over and over and over again, and that can be emotionally burdensome and challenging at times. Concerns of how our donor base might react. Does anyone else want to unmute and share a thought?
Hi,
Hey.
so my name's Katelyn Kemsky, and I'm a PhD student at NC State.
Hi, Katelyn.
And mine isn't so much a stopping point as it is a hurdle, and that is that I cannot find data anywhere of what our starting point actually is. So I'm doing research on zookeeper diversity, and I cannot find data anywhere on what those demographics currently look like. And so it's hard to justify that we need to study it and that there's a problem there when there is no starting point data.
I think Jo-Elle wants to jump in on that.
Katelyn, how did you know? Yeah.
I think it was the big arm movement.
Yes, Katelyn, and this has been raised time and time again. There are 170 people on this call who represent AZA membership. We have tried a couple of times to collect the data that you are referring to through the diversity committee. And due to the diversity of member organization types, it was very, very challenging. I think the question is, who should be collecting the data? Is this a membership service that AZA provides, or is there a member institution who wants to take it up? It's a big lift. It's a big lift, but the data does not exist. When we were trying to collect it with the diversity committee, there was a larger than you would expect reluctance to share the data from individual organizations. We actually had a couple of organizations who said they were advised not to share their data because they didn't want to look bad. And I believe there's a reluctance on the part of AZA to perhaps collect the data because of how it looks. So you have the data, it's in print. And so now what? And how does that make us look? There is data at the director level, and that has been collected every 2 years and started with Smithsonian National Zoo collecting that data on directors. But you are absolutely right. And so my arms went up like, yes, we don't know where we're starting from. We know anecdotally, but we don't know where we're starting from. And that's a good question of why not? And that, I think, in terms of allyship and looking at the number of people on this call, is certainly something that we all have spheres of influence that we can leverage to figure out how to move that forward.
Absolutely. Dean, I see your hand.
Yeah, so this is actually a fairly new development that I think Jo-Elle will be excited to hear about. So we've kind of recently gained, I think, some new traction on this. So Denise Verrett, who's a member of the AZA board, I think has helped us push this forward a little bit. And Teresa Mary, who is the current chair, it's one of her passion projects as well. So what you're going to see now is when they do the call for data on my organization, like within the AZA database, where there is now going to be a field where you can enter in your demographic data. And so we won't have it to the specifics of, individual job duties or anything like that. But for those organizations that have the data, and we're trying to match it with what they already have just for simplicity's sake, there will now be an option to at least know who is in our community, because we make a lot of assumptions and some of those are going to be more correct than others. But I did want everyone to know that's something that really just within the last few weeks, we've been actually coming back to, that both the AZA board and staff, I think, are really excited to finally move forward with some of this.
Great. I feel like we could talk about this for so many more hours, and hopefully over time we will. But as Zach has posted in the chat, we are going to continue on these conversations for the rest of the month. So please join us. We'll be hearing some more individual stories over the next 2 weeks, and then coming together to synthesize what we've learned and find solutions for the pathway forward. in our last week of the month. And so we really encourage you to bring a friend. These conversations are all the more richer if we have more people involved, especially friends who may be on the third, the third answer to that poll question, not at all familiar, or this is my first step in my journey. So we would love to see, yeah.
Jump in, Katelyn, bring a board member. If you're a director or CEO or anybody who has a connection to a board, bring a board member, because I heard that quite a lot about how that's important to get that kind of traction. See if you can encourage one of your board members to come along. It'd be great.
Absolutely. David, do you have anything you want to close us with?
No, just an amazing conversation. Thank you all for your great comments, all the panelists. And as we keep saying here, this is the first of our 4 sessions, and it's a journey, and we want you to come along on it, but please bring your friends. Our goal is to see that 180 number. We'd love to see it double by the end of this, because that means we have more people that are interested and engaged. So great to have you on, and look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks, Lori and Katelyn, for a wonderful job of facilitating. So
thank you all.
we will see you next week.
Happy Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.